11. This week, there's only one lecture, but you still have two sets of readings, videos, and assignments to complete. I am Dr. Patricia Gross, and this is the second time I'm recording this because the first time a friend texted me and it showed her phone number, so I decided to re-record. So hopefully I can get back that magic from the previous edition of this video. Here are your assignments for the first part of the week. For Monday, you're going to be watching this lecture. You have two other videos to watch. You're reading Simone de Beauvoir's The Introduction of the Second Sex, and you're completing your discussion board activities, which we'll talk about in a moment. Again, this is going to be a lecture that covers both week 1 and week 2, so, don't go anywhere. So, what is bad faith? So last week we discussed the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre. We focused on bad faith. What is it? He writes, "To be sure, the one who practices bad faith is hiding a displeasing truth or presenting as truth a pleasing untruth." That is existentialism's bad faith says that you are lying to yourself. But not all the time, but there's certain lies that we tell ourselves. So, for example, if I were to pretend that the only part of me that is real is the part of me that's a professor of philosophy, then I would be in bad faith because there's lots of other parts of me, such as the person who really likes to do home remodel, as well as the person that is like really into cats, and especially the fact that I currently have 5 of them. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty awesome, actually. So bad faith is a type of self-negation in which we're turning our negation that should be going outwards, as in I am not this person or this cat, and turning it inwards, and we're denying fundamental aspects of ourselves. And really, the ultimate thing that we're denying is that we are indeed free to make choices. And so this leads us to some problems, right? Because sometimes when we look at choices, sometimes it doesn't seem like we even have one. So if we look at this raw definition of bad faith, we might have to consider, as we're reading along with Beauvoir, are women necessarily in bad faith? If you're a part of an oppressed group, are you necessarily in bad faith? Because shouldn't you just be able to decide not to be oppressed or decide not to be a victim of sexism or and get over it? And this is one of the issues that Sartre will go up against later on in his career to say, actually, maybe humans aren't wholly free because we are socially conscripted in certain ways that affects our autonomy. So that's actually a question as we might critique Sartre for. But let's move on. Let's talk about Simone de Beauvoir. Simone Lucie Ernestine Marie Bertrand de Beauvoir lived between 1908 and 1986. She was a writer, intellectual, philosopher, existentialist, and feminist, amongst many more things. She was also the life partner of Jean-Paul Sartre, and they were lovers, friends, and intellectual partners. Some people claim that her work is derivative of Sartre. Some people claim that Sartre's work is derivative of de Beauvoir. But really, they are a group. They are kind of a package deal in a lot of ways, where they do have their own individual philosophy. They are also basically talked philosophy every single day. So basically, their philosophy is completely intertwined. You read for this week the introduction to her work, The Second Sex, which helped jumpstart the feminist movement in the U.S. that brought us things like the anti-harassment laws and Title IX. This is the outline of the book that you read the introduction for, specifically the Women in History section. It's a very interesting book, and I recommend checking it out. One of your assignments this week is to watch the video The Straw Feminist by Anita Sarkeesian. The purpose of this video is multiple. And one of the main focuses of it is to think about the nature of the representation of feminists or strong women in the media. I think that you'll notice that women that are feminists are often depicted as kind of man-eaters, which, by the way, is an old 18th century epithet against 18th, 19th century epithet against feminists that I always love. I've never been called a man-eater. But one of these days, I hope when people get over the whole feminazi thing and they start calling me a man-eater, that'd be nice. But anyway, I have never eaten a man, and so, or a woman, or anybody for that matter. I'm not a cannibal. Jeez, get off my back. I have never eaten anybody. But in any case, this representation of feminists as man-haters is something that kind of goes against the feminist movement, as you might say. In fact, feminism, the goal of feminism is not to hate men, but it just is a movement that calls for the equality between men and women and everyone else, right? There are good feminists and there are bad feminists. And sometimes sometimes the visible ones that we see are, quote, bad feminists, and some of the visible ones we see are good feminists. Not all feminists are women, and not all women are feminists. So, yeah, let's keep going. Oh, by the way, you have your homework assignments about this, right? So, Simone de Beauvoir writes, "This is the fundamental characteristic of a woman. She is the other at the heart of a whole whose two components are necessary to each other." So, human, man, is the whole, right? But woman is this weird other that's at the heart of that whole. Like, you need women to make more babies, right? You physically need them. However, the consideration of what it is to be human is decidedly male in both our language and our culture. And what Simone de Beauvoir is critiquing is the alterity of woman, the otherness of woman. And you can really see this a lot if you're looking at ancient texts like Aristotle, who's the student of Plato, will say that women are actually the, girl babies are actually the result of women standing in a southerly wind and having their fetus mutated by that southerly wind. And this idea of female being a mutated male comes up again and again in the history of Western, not just philosophy, but Western science, right? This idea that women are mutated males. In fact, it turns out to be the other way around, but the whole concept is a bit silly when you think about it, especially when we think that gender is such a huge construct in a lot of ways. So one way in which women are kind of considered to be this other that's not an ancient example can be seen in current examples such as drug trials. Many drug trials only use mice that are male and don't use female mice. And then when it gets to the time to make it to be a human trial, they only use male candidates, for example, for heart medication. Well, on the one hand, the argument is that you could just give women a smaller dose because women are typically considered to be smaller males, right? In science, it's like, oh, the women are smaller, we'll just give them less. Well, the problem is that for the same reason that drug trials don't want to use women, is the reason why women need to have their own drug trials, right? Like if we think about it, the composition of the bodies of women is very different from the composition of bodies of men. But in large part because women tend to have more fat in their bodies, and that does affect absorption of drugs, right? And it's something to be taken into account. Not to say that all scientists don't like. I'm not saying that all scientists do this. This is a trouble that just recently came out. Many organizations are working on rectifying these problems, but it has been an issue in the last several, centuries. Let's continue. Men profit. So the difference of women, the otherness of them, the alterity of them profits men in many ways, according to de Beauvoir. She says that men profit in many other more subtle ways from women's alterity. For all those suffering from an inferiority complex, this is a miraculous lineament. No one is more arrogant towards women, more aggressive, or more disdainful than a man anxious about his own virility. This is fantastic because she writes this in the 1950s, the 1940s. And the thing is, this text is it's so good, right? Because you all know that guy that can't get a date. So he's a total jerk and says that all women are terrible because he can't get a date, right? So she's saying that no one is more arrogant towards women, more aggressive, and more disdainful than a man anxious about his own virility. So virility is a man's kind of sexual potency or power, right? So if a man is anxious about his own power, he takes it out on the women that are around him. And the thing is, this is not to say that all men are terrible and all men hate women or all men are arrogant towards women, right? Feminism actually as a project itself is not one that tries to show that all men are awful. Actually, what feminism shows us is that, the patriarchy, that is the male-dominated system that we live in, is actually bad for men and women for a similar reason. Men aren't allowed to show their emotions, for example, and that's not very good. And, for people that say that they can show their emotions, that's good, good for you. But the fact of the matter is that our society is not very, very much one for letting men show emotions beyond that of anger, right? Men aren't supposed to care. And this is a problem, right? Because men are still human and they have human thinking parts and they do care and are capable of doing things like not raping people. And yet we have laws that make it seem okay to rape people because you just couldn't help yourself. What does that say about men, right? By the way, here's a bonus example. So one of the benefits of women's austerity is making men feel better about themselves, right? So the otherness of women makes men feel better about themselves. And one of the things that makes men feel better about themselves is this like hatred of feminists, right? And this hatred of feminists often comes out in representation of the straw feminist. Again, you're going to be watching this video. If you would like a bonus to your discussion board assignment this week, go ahead and find me some examples of the straw feminist besides this cartoon, for example, and post it to the discussion board and email me the examples as well. And that'll give you a couple points or 1 or 2 points on your final grade or final exam grade. Okay, your discussion board for Monday. So the first reading of this week is one that is highly influential to the history of philosophy. For your Monday discussion board, write a response to the following prompts. What was your first experience with feminism? Have you ever seen an example of a straw feminist in TV, the news, books, movies, etc.? Why do you think your example fits into the straw feminist trope? Sorry, a cat just ran up the stairs and distracted me. Why do some people, according to de Beauvoir and Sarkisian, claim that the project of feminism is done? And is femininity secreted by the ovaries? What does this question even mean? There's no need to respond to your colleague's Monday post. And I'm going to go ahead and go right on through to the next section. Again, you can see there's not that many slides. And that's because this is just a quick sort of snapshot of what you're going to be thinking about and writing about. So for Wednesday, I have a video for you. That's a dramatic reading by Lauren Lyons of Audre Lorde's There Is No Hierarchy of Oppressions. You have Audre Lorde's Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference to read, and you're going to be completing the discussion board activities. So Audre Lorde, or your second reading for this week, comes from Audre Lorde, who was an American writer, feminist, womanist, librarian, civil rights activist, poet, theorist, and many other things, who lived between 1934 and 1992. In the reading and the video, Lorde emphasizes the intersectionality of oppression. Before I discuss this briefly, I'd like to emphasize something. Oppression does not mean you're actively oppressing someone. To say we live in a patriarchal society that oppresses women does not mean that this specific man is oppressing this specific woman or women at all. It's about the system itself. The system separates men from men and women from women and men from women. The people in power want to divide us so that they can stay in power. This is an insight that I really enjoy from Carol Gilligan. However, there is more to oppression than just the oppression of women. Age, race, sex, class, oppression comes in many forms and often are not really separable, right? So the oppression that Audre Lorde felt as a woman, as a black woman lesbian, as a black woman lesbian mother, right? There's a lot of, the list goes on, right? Of the types of oppression that she suffered, and those oppressions cannot be taken away from her. Her experiences as a black woman, for example, cannot be boiled down to the experience of a black person and of a female person, right? It's specifically the intersection of those oppressions that are significant, right? Oppression, again, this is not an attack against white men in this class. Like, that's not what's going on here. This is not an attack against white people. It's not an attack against men. It's not an attack against most people. I guess we're attacking racist and sexist, but you guys aren't that, right? But the thing is, while there are individuals within, our system that do individual types of oppression, in general, when we talk about oppression and sociology and feminism and in philosophy, we're not talking about oppression by individuals. We're talking about systemic oppression, right? Now, does your uncle that makes bad jokes at parties, is he problematic? Is he part of the problem? Yeah, right? But I'm not saying you need to start attacking him over Thanksgiving. I mean, unless you feel like it. It's always fun to have a fight right during Thanksgiving, and then especially because you guys can't leave afterwards, you're just stuck there. Okay, so this is again, and when you're doing this reading, make sure you're not reading this as an attack on yourself. And one of the reasons I have you guys read Audre Lorde is a quotation from the reading in which she talks about white literature professors. And in it, she says that, and this really hit home to me. I'm not a literature professor, but this section really hit home to me. And it was a section in which she said that, look, she has white women literature professors say they don't feel comfortable including the works of black women authors. Why? Because they don't want to be, as white women, speaking for their situation, right? At the same time, those white women don't have a problem showing Chaucer or having people read Chaucer or Shakespeare, right? Or all these works by white men from England of the 17th century or something like that. But they do have a problem with being able to show the works of black women. Like, what is it that makes black women so different that they can't show that work? Or what makes Shakespeare so universal that we could show, that anyone can teach him? Well, when I read that, it was like I felt a smack in the face for the first time. I felt it in like my wind taken out of me, because the reason I hadn't included the work of black feminists, philosophers, is because I, as a white woman, did not feel like it was my place to take their voice, to take over what they were trying to say. Well, the trick is, I didn't have a problem showing the work of Augustine, who himself is, so I'm an Augustine scholar, and he is from North Africa, but I didn't have any problem speaking in his voice. I didn't have any problem speaking in Plato's voice. So why do I have a problem with speaking not in the voice of, or showing and sharing the work of someone like Audre Lorde? Well, she really did show me to myself. But the wonderful thing about it is this invitation to then start including these types of voices in my philosophy and in my teaching. So that's why I've included this, and again, this is an example of me. I'm your professor. I'm the fancy one that has the degree or whatever that is supposed to know better. And I was doing the thing that she said that people do, right? So, and this kind of leads me to the famous quote from her. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. So she's talking about a lot of different things here, but if we think about this quotation in terms of what I was just talking about, in terms of the way we considered oppression, right? Sometimes the way some people want to fix oppression is by fixing some small part of it. Okay, so women are oppressed, so let's get like equal pay amendment, which never passed, but it'd be nice. Sure would be nice. Anyway, so let's pass the equal pay amendment or something like that, right? Or, let's say black people are oppressed, so let's do this particular type of amendment to help black people. Or we could say that there's a problem with housing that's classist, and we need to help make housing more equal, so we're going to pass this type of amendment. Well, all of these, if we think about them separately, are things that we can handle separately. But unfortunately, we can't really think about oppression as being able to fix one part and using the master's tools, i.e. using the current economic and political system to fix one part of the system in order to make everything else run better. The problem is that the system runs on oppression, right? We can temporarily use the system to, quote, beat him at his own game, but the problem is the system is rigged. We can't bring about change without changing the system itself. Right? And we can't change the system until we look at the system as intersectional, and so we look at oppression as intersectional, right? And so we look at the different types of ways in which we are affected as human beings, right? And we're all, and I think one of the things is there's an invitation here to think about the ways in which you in your own life are a member of an oppressed group. So I'd like you to do that for a bonus assignment. Send me a couple sentences. In what way are you a member of an oppressed group? Think hard, right? And say why. Just an email to me. I'll give you a bonus point if you give it to me by Friday at 11:59 p.m., okay? So that's it for this week. Next week, we're going to be reading Iris Marion Young's Throwing Like a Girl. Oh, I didn't throw up the assignment for the second part of week 2, so I'm going to show you real quick. Oh, I don't have the internet on right here because I was blocking that stuff. Okay, well, is it going to show up now? Is it going to make me log in? I'm glad that you guys got to be here for this. Okay, here we go. So you got the first one, we talked about this. So for the second one, you have your video, you have your reading, and then I want you to 1, write a 3-paragraph summary of the reading, 2, write 3 questions for your colleagues by Wednesday, 11:59 p.m., and 3, respond to 3 of your colleagues' 3 questions by 11:59 p.m. on Friday. All right, everybody, thank you. Goodbye.